Back in December, the Biden administration went to court to fight Title 42. Remember Title 42? It's the legal measure that President Trump invoked at the start of the pandemic that allowed him to use the public health crisis as an excuse to expel migrants without giving them a chance for asylum. Well, 2 years later, Biden wanted it to end, asking the Supreme Court to let the law expire. In their own words, Team Biden argued that while the government recognizes that the end of the Title 42 orders will likely lead to disruption and a temporary increase in unlawful border crossings, the solution to that immigration problem cannot be to extend indefinitely a public health measure that all now acknowledge has outlived its public health justification. They even went so far as to call Title 42 now obsolete. And, of course, that opinion is consistent with President Biden's September assertion that the pandemic was, quote-unquote, over.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over.
So how strange, then, that after losing in court, the Biden administration reversed course and announced that they were planning to expand Title 42. That's right. Just last week, the White House hailed new enforcement measures to increase border security and reduce the number of people crossing illegally. And those who previously couldn't be expelled by Title 42 will be increasingly subject to expedited removal to their country of origin and subject to a 5-year ban on re-entry. The announcement is prefaced with this excuse: the courts have prevented the Title 42 public health order from lifting for now. But even if it can't be fully lifted now, that doesn't mean you have an excuse to expand it. Isn't the administration talking out of both sides of its mouth here? This strikes me as a deeply cynical move. In fact, listen even to what a Supreme Court justice said in their response to the Title 42 case. Quote, the current border crisis is not a COVID crisis, and courts should not be in the business of perpetuating administrative edicts designed for one emergency only because elected officials have failed to address a different emergency. We are a court of law, not policymakers of last resort. That wasn't Sotomayor or Kagan. That was Justice Gorsuch who said that. And I agree with Neil Gorsuch. And now I need to go take a shower. But the point remains. It was outrageous for Trump to use a public health emergency as an immigration tool. And it might be even worse for Biden to do it now, because Biden thinks that this public health emergency is now over. Right, Mr. President?
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over.
Except at the border, it seems. Beyond the ethics of Title 42, it isn't even effective. Data from Customs and Border Protection shows that Title 42 inaccurately inflates some metrics, making it look like there are more migrants crossing the southern border than there actually are. For example, yes, encounters at the southern border have reached record levels, but that doesn't mean that there are a record number of individual migrants entering. Since Title 42 has been enacted, the number of migrants apprehended multiple times has almost quadrupled, and each apprehension, even for repeat offenders, counts as a distinct encounter. And what does that have to do with Title 42? Well, under the policy, asylum seekers can try to re-enter the United States without fear of certain pre-COVID era penalties. So if Title 42 were allowed to expire, those penalties would be reimposed. Repeat attempts would presumably return to pre-pandemic levels, and the number of border encounters could actually drop over the long run. President Biden visited the southern border on Sunday for the first time as president, just ahead of a trip to Mexico, ostensibly to assess the situation. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott greeted the president, handing him a list of demands on border policy. Among bullet points, asking Biden to resume border wall construction and designate Mexican cartels as terrorists. Abbott urged the president to stop sandbagging the implementation of the Title 42 expulsions and fully enforce those measures as the federal courts have ordered you to do. That's right. The same people who want to build the wall also want Title 42 to stay. Mr. President, are you really going to keep siding with right-wing Republicans on this issue? Joining me now to discuss this is immigration advocate Erica Andiola. She's communications director at the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights and host of the Homeland Insecurity podcast, and Aaron Reichlin-Melnick, policy director of the American Immigration Council. Thank you both for coming back on the show. Erica, let me start with you. Let's talk about Title 42. The Biden administration asked the Supreme Court to lift the order. They refused. And now the Biden administration is expanding the order. Isn't the administration trying to have it both ways here?
Absolutely. Look, first of all, we have to remember what the promises of the Biden administration was. President Biden campaigned on ensuring that all of these Trump policies that were inhumane, that were keeping people, on the other side of the border waiting, right? Title 42, remain in Mexico. He said he was going to get rid of all of that, that he was going to restore the right to asylum for people who were trying to seek safety in the U.S. And in the contrary, he has been using this as well to appease the Republican side and also to appease some people within his administration who want to keep this policy.
Yes.
And the only message we have as advocates over and over again is that he needs to get rid of it. People need to be able to seek asylum in this country.
Aaron, you've called this expansion of Title 42 a carrot and stick approach by the Biden administration with an emphasis on the stick, you say. Break that down for us.
Well, when we talk about the use of Title 42, it's always important to remember that you can't actually use Title 42 on any given migrant unless there's another country that's willing to accept them. And for the population that this new Title 42 expansion targets, which is Cubans, Nicaraguans, Haitians, and Venezuelans back in October, until the Biden administration reached a deal with Mexico, no country was willing to take those migrants under Title 42. So despite the policy being in effect, they were essentially exempt from it due to diplomatic limitations. So now the Biden administration has gotten Mexico to act as essentially a surrogate country of deportation for these nationals, allowing them to be sent back to Mexico for the first time. This did, however, come along with a carrot, and that carrot is the creation of a new humanitarian parole program that will allow up to 30,000 nationals of those four countries to come to the United States each month. But for the migrants at the border today, most won't be able to take advantage of this program, so they will just find themselves sent back to Mexico with few options.
Erica, President Biden is now in Mexico, meeting with Mexican President López Obrador. At the start of their summit on Monday, the Mexican president said this to Biden. Have a listen.
Que es el momento de terminar con ese olvido, ese abandono, ese desdén hacia América Latina y el Caribe y comenzar con usted, porque no habría otro dirigente que pudiera llevar a cabo esta empresa.
Erica, when the president talks about a history of disdain and abandonment from the U.S. towards Mexico and the wider region, he was talking about an economic relationship. But migration, you could say migration, the same applies to migration, the same disdain and abandonment towards migrants coming from that part of the region, especially from countries that are unstable or in poverty, partly because of U.S. policies, historic U.S. interventions.
Yeah, we can have a whole huge, long segment about all of the different policies in history that have allowed for the United States to destabilize regions of Latin America and Mexico. And unfortunately, we never do anything to figure out what to do when people have to leave those places, right? And even climate change right now is pushing people to leave, right? It could be violence. It could be many factors that are pushing people to leave. Now, what we have been able to have, one of the tools that we have been able to have to open our arms and welcome people in this country is asylum. And it's a human and it's a legal right for people to be able to have the ability to come to the border and say, I need protection. And now the president is telling people, go to an app, go on your phone in your country of origin or where you are and ask for asylum, right, on an app. Can you imagine people who perhaps don't even have access to technology? I mean, there are many factors that would not allow people to do this, but also, how are you asking people to stay where they're fearful? That is the actual reason why people are leaving, because they're fearful, and you're asking them to wait in their country, apply on an app, and then figure out what happens, right? And in the meantime, they could be killed. Anything could happen. That's just not what asylum is.
Agreed. Aaron, last question to you. Everyone, Democrats and Republicans alike, they say they want to get numbers down at the border. That's the underlying goal, rightly or wrongly. If Joe Biden called you up and said, OK, we won't expand Title 42, Aaron, what should we do to keep numbers down at the border? What would you say? Because the argument is that there are record numbers coming in at the border and that they're unsustainable numbers.
I think the first thing the Biden administration should do is something that they are actually taking some steps to start, which is expand access to asylum at ports of entry. Even the Trump administration allegedly said they didn't have problems with people seeking asylum at ports of entry. So number one effort should be making sure there is substantial infrastructure in place that can funnel people to those safer legal ways that don't require crossing between ports of entry. And at the same time, alternate pathways like this parole program are a good idea. But what they can't do is supplement asylum. What they need to do is complement asylum, be something along with it to give people additional options, not only one other option. Asylum is a human right. It is a right enshrined in our laws, and we have to keep getting away from this myth that if we just crack down hard enough, people will just not flee when their lives are at risk.